Hey guys, it is the 27th day, so that means we're reading chapter 27. One more chapter to go. Man, what a good chapter, what a long chapter that we read today. There's a whole lot here, as you can imagine. I will preach on some of this as we're getting closer to Easter, but if you have questions or something I just kind of skim over, please feel free to call, text, email, whatever. We start with chapter 27. And there's a few things I want to point out here in the beginning. It says, when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel. It was illegal for the Sanhedrin, right? 72 of the Pharisees plus the high priest makes it 73. It was illegal for them to meet at night, which they already did the night before. So they had to come together really quick in the morning to make the verdict. They've already met, had their minds kind of set on what they were going to do with Jesus, but they couldn't officially say it until the breaking of the sun, right? And so they meet in the morning, bam, they do this, and it says they take them to Pilate, the governor. Pilate is the appointed governor of Judea, given by Rome. Remember, Israel is under Roman rule, so of course the emperor would put his people in charge, right? So he takes them to Pilate. Let's see, and then we see a little bit about Judas, right? And we see that what's interesting, Judas' betrayer saw that Jesus was condemned. He saw that he was guilty. The Sanhedrin said he's guilty. Then what happens? It says he changed his mind. This is interesting to see, and we'll see in a minute why. This is a remorseful Judas, not a repentant Judas. There is a difference. He is remorseful. He's sorry that he did it, but he is not repentant. Okay, and we'll see why in just a second. And so he brought back the 30 pieces of silver. And notice what he says. He says, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. Right? This betrayer, Judas, tells us, he testifies that Jesus is innocent, right? Traitor in his own words. And it says he takes this money and throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple. What's interesting about this word temple, those of you who's been doing Exodus with us, this is the Greek word naos, naos. This is what we call the holy place. So he doesn't just throw it in the courtyard of the temple. He actually throws it deep inside of the temple, a place where only the priest can go, not the Holy of Holies, but the holy place. And what he's doing by saying that is he's throwing it in and he's saying, this is the priest's fault, right? He's throwing it in there. Then he's saying, this is all the priest's fault. And so it's just interesting. And you read in the Greek, it kind of gives you a more context of what he's doing. So he throws his money in the naos and then he goes and he hangs himself. Now, why I said early he was remorseful, not repentant, in John chapter 17, it tells us that Judas went to hell. If he was repentant, he would not have went to hell. But he was not repentant. He was remorseful for what he did. There is a difference. And so Judas hung himself. And then it goes on and they go on and talk about, they say, what are we supposed to do with this money? We don't want this blood money. We don't want us to go bad. What's funny is they paid the blood money, right? But now that it's coming back, they want to act too holy that they can't touch or put this blood money into the temple treasury, which they took it out of to pay, right? In verse 9, I know we're spending a lot of time on this Lazarus part, but there's a lot here. It says that then was fulfilled by what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, and there's a quote. That quote is not in the book of Jeremiah. That quote is in the book of Zechariah chapter 11. And so some people will say this, hey, the Bible's wrong, blah, 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 blah. Here's the reality. Jeremiah and Zechariah prophesied during the same time to the same place. And so in the Old Testament, okay, even though we're in the New Testament, remember, Matthew's writing to Jews, right? In the temple, they would have had scrolls, and they would have been the scroll of Jeremiah, which have been read all the time. At the bottom of that scroll would have also been the prophet Zechariah. So we can see here in a Jewish mind, right? You have Jeremiah and you have Zechariah, two different books, but on one scroll, right? Two different books in our English Bible, but in one book in the Hebrew Bible, okay? So just need to kind of, it's not that they messed up, Matthew messed up, it's not that. It's just, once again, they're thinking like a Jewish person. What happens? They take Jesus before Pilate. And notice it says, Pilate says, "Are you the King of Jews?" Now, just notice, this is a name that the Pharisees give Jesus. Jesus never said he's the King of the Jews. The Pharisees gave him this because they wanted Pilate to think that he is this insurrectionist. He's this person that's going against Rome, and he's the king, and he's going to lead a revolt against emperor of Rome, and so they should kill him, right? So it's just a name that they brought up to help sell their story. So he goes before Pilate, and Pilate says, "Man, he's not saying anything, right?" And he says, "Okay, he's not really guilty, blah, blah, blah. I don't have what to do." And so he says, "I have an idea," right? I always let somebody go at Passover. And they have Barabbas. And in verse 16, it says he was a notorious prisoner. We find out from other Gospels why. He's an insurrectionist who killed several people. So he's a murderer of several people. And so he does this. So he's a bad dude. And so Pilate was thinking, hey, they would not ask for his release, right? Jesus really hasn't done anything. But that's not God's plan, right? Let's see, verse 18, "For he knew that it was out of envy that they delivered him up." Even Pilate knew it was out of jealousy that these Pharisees, that these priests are doing this, right? He's sent through it. Even his wife had a vision. Hey, she goes and she kind of interrupts him and says, "Don't do this, don't do this." He knows he's innocent, but once again, these priests and Pharisees are smart. In verse 20, it says this, "Now the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd." He knew Jesus was innocent. His wife told him he was innocent. But how would you change the mind of a politician? It would always be by the crowds. It's always by the voters, right? And that's what happens. They get the crowds, they get the multitude stirred up, and he has to go with Israel. He can't have some riot or some insurrection under his watch, or Caesar would replace him with another guy, right? So that's what they do. And the crowd screams, "Let him be crucified, let him be crucified." And so Pilate, what does he do? He tries to show them that this is not his fault, right? He's not a part of this. And it says, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Once again, Judas said he was innocent. Now, what happens? Now Pilate says he's innocent, right? There's two people, two bad dudes that says he's innocent. And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and our children." That can preach for a long time, but just notice the crowd saying, "Hey, his blood can be on us." They have no idea what they're asking for, right? They have no idea that they are crucifying the Messiah, the Savior of the world, in which his blood would bring them eternal salvation if they came to faith. They have no idea. They have no idea. And it's just, they're just asking for something. What happens next, right? So the soldiers of Pilate takes him, and they start to go through the pre-crucifixion, the beating, the scourging, the crown of thorns. One thing that's interesting in verse 27, it says they took a whole battalion. A normal execution, a normal crucifixion would be a four-man squad. It's called a quinterion. But here it's a whole battalion. He sent 600 men, guards, soldiers, to make sure this happens. And so it just tells you just what was going on in Jerusalem, right? Lots of craziness. Everything's going on. Then they get the crown. They beat him. They do everything. What happens? They see Simon of Cyrene. Cyrene is in North Africa. And so they see this guy. And they say, hey, you got to carry his cross because we beat this dude so bad he can't carry his cross, right? And so he does it. They go to Golgotha. And there's so much prophecy in this. I mean, I don't have time to get into it, but in this chapter, if you're reading this through a Jew's mind, I mean, there's just so much prophecy, talking about casting lots, talking about the mixed wine, talking about All the things that happened is all prophetic. It's all been spoken about in the past. But in verse 40 it says, saying, he's on the cross, right? And he's saying, hey, you said you would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Those of you who went through Exodus, right? Skenu, tabernacle, right? Jesus is that tabernacle. He's that dwelling, right? They thought he was talking about the building. He was really talking about himself, and he will raise it up in 3 days. And so it goes on, and then we see in verse 45 the final death of Jesus at the crucifixion. It says, from now on, the 6 hours noon, right? So at noon, there was darkness until 3 p.m., the 9th hour. All this is going, and then he cries out, my God, why have thou forsaken me? Big circle that word. This is the point where Jesus took your sin. He took my sin. This is the time where Jesus took on all the sin of all the people of the world, and it's almost where God has to turn his back. God cannot look upon sin. He cannot look upon unholiness. And here, Jesus, who's always been with God, second person, has always had that connection with his Father. What happens is, for the first time, that connection has been broken. And through the physical pain, through the emotional pain, through everything, there's nothing more than the spiritual pain, right? And so he cries out, my God, why have you turned your back on me? Why have you forsaken me? He knows why. Jesus knows why. He knows who his Father is. He knows he's holy. But Jesus did that. And so it happens, and Jesus cried out with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. He died, right? And after that, we see what? The temple was torn in two, the curtain, right? So now there's no longer a holy of holies. It's that we can go directly to God, right? Once again, temple, skinu, right? So we have that, right? Bam. Tabernacle, those of you reading Exodus. The earth shook, the rocks were split. Verse 52, this is important. And the tombs were open, okay? There's a pause between verse 51 and 52, okay? There's a slight pause. Matthew writes it this way so we can read it, and we're getting the glimpse. The tombs were not open when Jesus died. The tombs were open when Jesus was resurrected. And you see that, and it says, and the bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep, who had died, were raised with Jesus, okay? And coming out of their tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to them. And so it's just kind of Matthew summing up what's going on. So there's a pause, right? 51 and 52, he's just crushing it together. And so when Jesus was resurrected, so was many dead people, saints, holy saints, and they went in and prophesied into Jerusalem about God, about Jesus. And then we jump back, right? So you have 52 and 53 happens 3 days later. 54, we come back. So really you'd read 51, 54. And it says the centurion who was there, he says, truly this was the Son of God. So we have Judas, we have Pilate, and we have a soldier. All three people were bad dudes. All three people are part of Jesus' killing. All three of them testifying that he was innocent and he was God, right? It's just amazing when you put this together. Verse 55, favorite verse there. There were many women. Guys, they were losers. They were scared. They didn't do anything, but it was the women. It was the women that were there. And it's still today the women who make the church go. In verse 57, we see that Jesus is buried. We see Joseph, a rich man, Joseph of Arimathea. We know a little bit about him. I don't have time to get into it, but he had lots of money, and he comes in and he asked Pilate for his body. Normally they would leave the bodies of crucifixes up so people would see their bodies and say, I better not go against Rome. But he takes them down, he wraps them, and puts them in a new tomb, which is interesting. New tomb would also be called a virgin tomb. Jesus came in through a virgin womb and went to a virgin tomb. There's a lot there. Can't unpack it. You can study on that, but it's good stuff. And so it's a new tomb. It's never been used before. Once again, a lot of the ladies were there, and this is the best part. This is the funniest part to me through all of this, through everything that we've read about the Pharisees and what they've said to Jesus. Notice verse 62. The next day, That's Sabbath. This was Passover, right? So on Sabbath, on Sabbath, right, when they couldn't do anything, they couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't preach, they couldn't do right. They talk so much about Jesus, right? But on Sabbath, on Sabbath, what happens? They go to Pilate. They schedule a meeting. They break their own rules of what they accuse Jesus to do, and they go to Pilate and they say, Listen, Jesus, when he was alive, said he's going to raise in 3 days. We don't really believe that, right? That's not really going to happen. But we're afraid some people's going to come and steal his body and say it happened. So we need some soldiers to guard that. And Pilate says, fine, take some of my soldiers. They go, they seal it. They put a rope around it with a wax seal of the Roman governor, and they put soldiers there. It's just so funny how this ends with them doing exactly what they killed Jesus for. Oh, so good. You can't make up a story this good. Guys, that's it. I know I went long. This was a super long chapter. A lot there. I know I missed a lot too. If you have questions or whatever, I missed something, please feel free to call or text. We've got one more day and we are ending with the resurrection. I cannot wait to conclude Matthew with you guys. God bless. We will see you tomorrow on chapter 28.